Well, horrific news today in our economy. Statistics South Africa is saying that economic activity shrank by 51% year-on-year in the second quarter of the year due to the lockdown. The first time also our economy shrinking in 4 successive quarters since becoming a democracy. That tells you about the position our economy was in before the lockdown. Economist Duma Gqubule joins me now to discuss more on this. Duma, good afternoon to you. Firstly, the impact of the lockdown. This figure is broadly in line with expectations.
Yes, it is broadly in line. But the thing is, as you were saying just now in the introduction to this, that we've been having, our economy has been in a very bad position for the past 5 years. So this is just a crisis upon a crisis. We've had, in the past 2 years, 2 consecutive years of declining GDP growth. We've had 5 consecutive years of declining GDP per capita, and we had 3 quarters of a declining GDP. So this is the worst contraction that we will ever see probably in our lifetimes, yeah.
And I mean, you talk about the economic picture beforehand. I mean, if you go back to the 1970s, you'll see that unemployment has risen literally all the way through that time. And yet it seems that the conversations around the economy haven't really changed. We're having the same conversation at the same time.
It is incredible, Stephen. I just can't understand it. Recently, the last week or 2, I was reading all the recommendations that were made at NEDLAC by the ANC, by the government, and all the economic recovery plans, and none of them had a plan to get the economy out of the situation. Yeah.
Is it broken politics? I mean, I suppose that's the question to ask at this stage. Is it broken politics that's leading to a broken economy?
Yeah, it's broken politics, because that's the only way you can explain the paralysis that is in the ruling party, that they cannot decide on an economic policy for the country. There is an inexplicable paralysis that we're seeing in the ruling party. Yeah.
I mean, if you go back to, I think it was February, maybe at the beginning of the lockdown, around about March, Tito Mboweni, the finance minister, he said that he had been given the green light for reforms. It was his hallelujah moment. I mean, no one's singing hallelujah right now.
No, that's the whole point. The plans that were on the table, they're from September last year, and they've got nothing to do with the current crisis. The current crisis is a crisis like no other. It requires a response like no other. You can't bring up a plan that you had 6 months, a year ago, and say it is appropriate for the current situation. Yeah.
Okay, so Duma, what do we do? I mean, speaking as an economist,
there is no other way except to the interest rates next week must come to 0. We must do things that we've never done before. We must now start talking about mobilizing resources for a proper fiscal stimulus to replace the lost GDP that's in our country. There is no other way. There has to be a stimulus, and Stephen, I've been saying this to you before the crisis, and it's even more urgent than it is now. Yeah.
So when you talk about a stimulus, I mean, we already had a stimulus. We understand that doesn't seem to have worked. A lot of it wasn't sort of used. There wasn't the borrowing that we expected by small firms. The money for a stimulus, where would it come from?
There are very many. We've talked about recommendations about. The central bank is sitting on foreign reserves of about 900 billion. The Public Investment Corporation is sitting with assets of about 2 trillion rand. The South African Reserve Bank can also do monetary financing of the government spending, what is called quantitative easing. There's so many issues, there's so many options that we can do to get this economy going. Yeah.
So, I mean, it comes back to the same question, which I'm afraid, as you say, you've already said is inexplicable. I mean, the ANC just doesn't seem to be doing anything. So that leads me to...
You know what? I read that document, the government recovery plan, the ANC recovery plan, and there's not a single new idea. The only idea that they have is this thing relating to changes to Regulation 28 of the Pension Act. This is a crisis like no other. And you're going to put in a soft obligation for institutions to invest in infrastructure, and you expect this to... No, it doesn't work like that, Yeah.
So, Duma, if we don't reform, if there's nothing, if we don't follow some of the advice that you've suggested, and you and I have spoken about this many times, what happens? We get poorer, right? If we get poorer,
yes, okay.
we get hold on. We get poorer and we get angrier as well, don't we?
Yes, the social dislocation is incredible that we're going to see. Yeah. Sorry, yeah. Thank you. The social dislocation that we're going to see is incredible in our country because, let me give you an example. In the 26 years of democracy, GDP per capita has increased by 28% only. China has increased by 700%, India by 300%. But at the end of this year, we're going to see we're going to be 10% poorer on average as a country, yeah. And so we're going to be, this will wipe away, eviscerate all the gains of our democracy.